One, with Britain and America on the brink of a military response to terrorism, the Panorama debate. Here's David Dimbleby.
Tonight in Panorama, we debate the strategy that's emerging to destroy bin Laden and what Britain's role in it should be, both in the Middle East as an ally of the United States and here at home in pursuing the war against terrorism. The task force is in place and ready to strike. It's 19 days since the attacks on the United States. Will the response match the first angry reaction?
People have declared war on America, and they have made a terrible mistake.
American people have a clear understanding that this is a war.
Are we at war with the people that have committed this terrible atrocity? Absolutely.
We're going to smoke them out of their caves and get them running.
We stand shoulder to shoulder with our American friends in this hour of tragedy.
As the days have passed, the rhetoric seems to have been a bit tempered by caution.
Patience and focus and discipline.
Needless to say, there's not going to be a D-Day as such.
I predict that it will be hard and that it will be effective, but nobody should make any assumptions about timescales.
Well, we have a range of views represented here tonight, and let's begin straight away with that issue, whether some of the stuffing has been knocked out of the first American response to the horrors that took place in New York and in Washington. Bob Stewart.
Well, I think it's excellent that there's been a long time since that happened, 19 days, and in that time people have actually looked at the options to see exactly what might happen. And of course, the military option is something you don't want to take lightly. And anyone that goes in to find bin Laden or his associates has got to have a mission. And that mission can only come if they've got the intelligence that exactly details where he is.
Do you think they thought it would happen faster? Because as we saw there, the first reaction, of course, was very ferocious. And I think a lot of people thought there'd be action by now.
Yes, so did I. I think most people thought the Americans wouldn't be able to stand back and do it. And they have. They've held back, and they're now looking very carefully at what they could do. And I think that's excellent.
Bianca Jagger, do you think there's been a change in attitude in the United States from what you've seen?
I don't think there's been a change, really, not from the public. I think there has been a more cautious approach from the part of the government. If they want to keep the coalition alive, I think they need to be very cautious on the actions that they will take.
Bob Marshall-Andrews.
I think you're right. I think what alarmed a lot of people, myself included, at the outset was the vernacular of war. There were two problems here. The first was the legality, which is another matter. But the second was, it seemed to me and many others, that it endowed the terrorists who did this with precisely the status that they sought. The IRA, throughout the whole of the history that we have known, have always sought to justify their acts, their criminal acts, by the legitimacy of war, of stating we are at war. And we have always quite rightly said, you are not at war with us, you are criminals. We will not make war with you, we will prosecute you. Now that is a very different thing, and it is a very important vernacular. And I, for one, am very pleased to see that that has gone.
You don't think there's not going to be military action?
I think that there almost certainly will be military action,
right.
But I think that that is another point that we must come to, and that is what are the steps, the legal and judicial steps, that need to be taken before we arrive at that point.
Would it be wrong, Andrew Roberts, to suggest that for the moment, psychologically speaking, and in the public mind, the terrorists still, in a sense, have the upper hand because nothing's happened?
I wouldn't say they have the upper hand. I think America's shown commendable restraint in the way in which it hasn't attacked yet. But this is nothing to do with politics and everything to do with getting information on the ground about where to attack and what to actually take out. I mean, we don't have human intelligence. We don't have spies in the Al-Qaeda camp, by all accounts, and so they're looking at what to hit. It's nothing to do with anything to do with politics.
Catherine Hamlet, what do you make of what's happened in these first days?
Well, it's coming at you from all sides, really. I mean, there's the legality issue of, an act of terrorism. Is it an act of terrorism or is it an act of war? If you say it's an act of war, you leapfrog the whole judicial process. I mean, where's the evidential link that we've been promised?
Which the Prime Minister said today he had and had seen.
Yeah, they say it, but if the Taliban are saying that they've got bin Laden and they will surrender him if they're given the evidence, then why don't we give them the evidence and we can get this guy out of here and everybody can go home and get on with their lives?
Jenny Tong, does that make sense to you?
Well, I agree with most of what's gone before. I mean,
but what Catherine said, that we should give the evidence to the Taliban now.
We have to have justice. I don't know that we should make all the evidence public, no. I mean, obviously there has to be some security on these issues. But I think what has happened over the last 3 weeks is there has been a remarkable coalition that's built up, which has shown some restraint and some signs of thinking on these issues. But the thing that has pleased me most of all is that humanitarian aid has started to flow, which will not just help the refugees who've needed help for years now, but it will also save that region from being destabilised. Terribly important we keep Pakistan on board.
You said we must have justice. What do you mean by justice in this context?
Well, I'm saying just really agreeing so much with what Bob Marshall-Andrews said, that this is a matter of justice, of bringing these people to justice. It is not a war. They are terrorists, they are criminals, and they need to be brought to justice. To bring them to justice may involve military action, but that is not the same as waging war.
Nicholas Soames, how do you read it?
Well, I don't think that military action will define this campaign. I'm quite clear that there will be military action, and indeed that there should be, but I don't think it will be the defining thing of this campaign. And I think we should not underestimate the astonishing amount of work and the patience, the strategic patience the Americans have used to bring together this tremendous coalition involving Russia, involving China, us, Jack Straw, the Foreign Secretary, going to Iran. All this is terribly important. And this coalition is going to be way beyond the military. It is financial intelligence, security, policing, and all this will be a constant war on terrorism. And the problem is going to be to enable public opinion to go along with this for a long period of time, because this is not anything when you're going to be able to say, right, we've achieved it, we've done it. That's the problem.
Mohammed Sawa.
Our motive must be to bring the perpetrators to justice and hold them accountable and catch them and submit to the courts, not revenge or blind.
But do you really think it'll be possible to get bin Laden before a court?
I have firm view that if international community issue an ultimatum to the Taliban that Osama bin Laden must be handed over to the international tribunal, because there is degree of argument in this, that when Milosevic can be tried in the international tribunal and when the Lockerbie suspects can be tried in a neutral court, then why we can't bring Osama bin Laden and other terrorists in Afghanistan to the international community? And I can tell you that will help a lot.
John Reid, do you think that's a possible or a feasible aim?
Well, I think some of the things that Sawa is speaking about are rather complicated, because of course one of them deals only with sovereign states and with politicians in sovereign states. But I think the main thing is that wisdom dictates that frustration and anger and shock, no matter how justified, are rarely a good guide to action. And therefore I think we have taken exactly the right course in being honest with people and saying that this campaign, struggle, war, will be long, it will be wide, and it will be deep. It will be long in the sense that fighting any disease of this nature is a continual battle, and the first phase of it we know is to search for bin Laden and bring him to justice. It will be wide in the sense that Nicholas Soames said. It will be fought with diplomacy, with politics, with perhaps recourse to the legal side, domestically and internationally, economically, as well as military. And the one thing that's interested me is so much concentration has been on the military, when an immense amount of Tony Blair's time, David Blunkett's and Gordon Brown's has been spent in other aspects. And it will be deep because it will need an enduring resolution. This will not be finished in days and months.
It's not surprising the concentration has been on the military in view of the number of ships and men that have been sent out to the Middle East. But just one point. What's your reaction to the news today that the Taliban say they know where bin Laden is, or they have him under their protection and want to negotiate?
Well, the position has been made quite plain that we want to build the broadest coalition and draw the dividing line between terrorists and those who are against terrorism. We ask people to come on the side of the international community. Yeah, but do you take this seriously? We know that. Do you take this seriously when they say that he's in an unknown place in Afghanistan under our control and we're thinking of negotiating? Well, if you're asking me if I believe he's in Afghanistan, the answer is yes. If you ask me if it's merely a matter of asking the Taliban, please tell us where he is, that's a different matter. And I think we also should realise it's not just bin Laden, it's the apparatus of terrorism associated with bin Laden.
Okay. I want to produced the result of a brief poll we did for Panorama. I'll come to you in a second. We commissioned a special poll to see what people in Britain think about the handling of the crisis, and rang 1,000 people, ICM did, for Panorama over the weekend. Interestingly, we asked whether Mr. Blair was right when he said that Britain should stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States. 76% said yes, and only 12% said that that was wrong. But when we went on to the action that standing shoulder to shoulder should involve, people appeared to support only the very first stage of military action. That's to say that when asked whether military action should stop if bin Laden was handed over or was killed, 56%, over half the country, said yes, military action should then stop, and only 27% said that it should carry on. Michael Ancram, does it look as though this coalition and this shoulder to shoulder, and indeed the political parties all uniting, or the Conservative and Labour uniting on this, is out of step with public reaction and sympathies?
I think there may be a misunderstanding on the part of the public, possibly because of the question asked, because as John Reid said, this isn't just about taking out bin Laden. That's important. We understand there is firm evidence that he was involved and his organisation was involved. But this is a fight against terrorism. It's not just about bringing people to justice. It's also about preventing this type of atrocity happening again. And if we're going to do that, we actually have to wage a broad fight against terrorism wherever we find it, to make sure that we can stop this type of action happening in the future.
But you wouldn't want to see military action
just by taking one man out.
But you wouldn't want to see military action stop simply if bin Laden was either found or killed. Would you? I mean, would you argue for that?
Why I said the question may be slightly ambiguous is it talks only about military action. This is a fight, as a number of speakers have already said, which is going to be waged militarily, diplomatically, in all sorts of different ways. What is absolutely essential is that we don't get taken up by the idea that it's all about one man, and when that one man is dealt with or brought to justice, it's over. We know there is an enormous network of terror capable of delivering even greater atrocities than the one we saw. We have to wage a complete and comprehensive and relentless fight against that terrorism until we beat it.
John Nichol, what do you think the military aspect of this should be?
I think the greatest problem with it is the use of the phrase that came out within the first hours of this attack, a war against terrorism, and we're stuck with that now. You know, the military can kill terrorists, there's no doubt about that. The military can't kill terrorism. Terrorism has always been with us, and Michael Ancram was rightly saying that we need to stop terrorism. But the simple fact is we're not going to stop terrorism. No politician, no military person is going to be able to stop terrorism. It's always been with us, it's always going to be with us. We are going to see military action. I think that in the coming days, perhaps weeks, we will see the absolute destruction of the terrorist training camps. Not because militarily it's the most sensible thing to do, but because politically we are almost committed to it now.
Terry Waite, what's your reading of how things stand 19 days on from the atrocities?
Well, first of all, I am relieved that there seems to have been a time of calm and assessment of the situation. I was alarmed by some of the initial rhetoric that was coming out, particularly from certain leaders in America. I think that at this stage it is absolutely vital that America stand by the law and strictly obey that and strictly deal with that. I think it has been excellent that a coalition has been formed, but I think we ought to remember that that is, for certain countries, rather a fragile coalition.
You've got direct experience of this. Do you think these people can be talked to? Do you think bin Laden's organisation can be...
I definitely think they can be spoken with, yes, definitely, and talked to. I've no experience of the Taliban, but from all accounts, they are a very unusual group, to put it mildly. But having said that, my view, if they say, present us with evidence and we will negotiate, what is wrong but taking a little time and taking them at their word?
Martin Bell, would you agree with that as a policy?
Broadly, I think as a society we're facing one of our greatest challenges in my lifetime. And I'm extremely relieved we have not lashed out in blind anger and bombed hillsides. I think we can take our time to negotiate. What the other speakers have said is true. This is political, it's diplomatic, more than it's military. And I think we have to proceed along those lines very carefully, realizing that terrorism is in the minds of men and women, and we can't bomb our way to success here.
Just following on from that, if we do that, if we do just go in and bomb and use military might in that way, the coalition will be severely threatened simply because there are substantial numbers of the members of the population of certain countries for whom that type of military activity will just fan the flames.
You agree with that, Andrew?
Not really, no. I think that the coalition is there to fight the war rather than for its own sake. The point about it is that when a crime has been committed, you go and get the suspect, then you present the evidence.
But large numbers of people in the coalition are specifically there not to fight the war, aren't they?
Well, yeah, precisely. And the people who are going to be fighting the war, largely the Americans and the British, are the people who are actually going to be on the front line. The rest is all just padding.
But that with great respect, exemplifies precisely the problem which was shown by your poll. We have created a demonology here. I mean, bin Laden, somebody wholly unheard of by most people 2 months ago, is now public enemy #1.
Are you surprised?
I'm not in the least surprised, given the way that it has been dealt with. But the most important thing is to follow a judicial process. I am not aware of the evidence against bin Laden. The Prime Minister tells us that there is evidence that he has seen, but that is secret. You don't have to be a very good lawyer to realise that the word of one man saying, I believe that X is guilty, is not evidence. Okay. We must provide the evidence. And may I just finish, David? There is a framework for this, and it's called the United Nations. Mm-hmm. And that is where you present your evidence.
Okay. Sarah Joseph, are you comfortable with what's happened in the 19 days since the terror in New York and Washington?
I'm glad that we've had the time, to be honest. I wasn't comfortable in the early days. I was very fearful in the early days that we were just going to carpet bomb and there was going to be this rash action. However, I don't feel necessarily comforted by the long, deep campaign that this is going to go on for years and years against terrorism. Firstly, because on Bush's lists it's only Muslims. What happens to the ETA terrorists, the Irish terrorists, the Tamil Tigers? What is it? Just a war on Muslim groups? Secondly, that it's a monolithic entity. This presentation of they as a monolithic entity. Actually, terrorism seems to me insidious. It seems small. It's not every terrorist group has the same motivation, and so therefore I think it has to be treated differently. I think that the rule of law has to be applied, because if we diminish ourselves in our application of it, we are giving we are raising them, but we have to give sanctity to our own civility.
John Reid, does the war against terrorism include the IRA and ETA?
Yes,
and
it
the
did.
Tamil
And I mean, the
Tigers?
answer to Sarah's question, which is a very valid one, and I think a very important one, is that, of course, we did use military means against the IRA for over 30 years. Indeed, in Ireland, some would say from around 1640. So it has been a long military campaign.
But it hasn't succeeded. But what succeeded is this government's wonderful attempt.
No, that's Sarah, because ultimately you cannot win or defeat only by military means. The point I made at the beginning is that does not mean to say you have not to be prepared to use military means. And in Northern Ireland, for instance,
it hasn't
after
worked
30, well, it has worked to this extent, David, that we have a better place in Northern Ireland now than we've had for decades, precisely because the futility of terrorism was seen by the terrorists, and we have now gone on to a political field. But there is no suggestion that the people who a fortnight ago massacred, 5,000 to 6,000 people, are at that stage where if you turned up with a writ legally or opened a political door, they would accept it. So you have to
Bianca Jagger.
I think that I would like to go back to the statement that was made that this was a war on terrorism. What I'm concerned about is that terrorism cannot be won only by military means. And we have seen that in Great Britain, we have seen that in France, we have seen that in many other parts of the world. The other thing is that in the poll that you made, that was very interesting, when the British people were ready to abandon that coalition and to be shoulder to shoulder with the American government, is because people want justice. They not necessarily want revenge and retribution. And I think that we should be very careful that in response to what happened in the United States, that we seek justice, that we do not seek retribution.
But a lot of people in the United States, you were there when this happened, will be seeking retribution.
Of course. I mean, 90% of the people want
and the political pressure for retribution will be very great.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, there will. And let's not forget that this organisation remains in being. And while it remains in being, it remains a threat. And that is the reason why there is an urgency to get on and deal with the matter. And frankly, that is obviously something acting in direct contradiction to the requirement to do things legally, slowly, etc.
I want to ask you about something slightly different, which is what shoulder to shoulder actually means, what shoulder to shoulder implies for the relationship between Britain and the United States. Does it mean, Nicholas Soames, that what President Bush says the British government is signed up to? Or as Charles Kennedy, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, said the other day, they mustn't have an open check, you've got to be able to tap on the shoulder. What is the loyalty in standing shoulder to shoulder?
Well, we are absolutely a reliable ally of the United States of America, and in this particular regard, wholly committed, in my view, to what the United States is trying to do. And I must make one
hang
point.
on, but in a position to discuss and temper if we don't like,
absolutely,
or harden resolve if we think it's going soft?
I mean,
what is the relationship?
I'm quite sure that the Americans are listening very carefully to what their allies, particularly their closest allies, are saying. And there is one further point, David, which is extremely important. Terrorism knows no geographical bounds. It knows no ethnic marker. It is a worldwide, thoroughly dangerous, destabilizing phenomenon. And that is something which it is worthwhile standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States for.
Catherine Hamnett, do you approve of Britain and America standing shoulder to shoulder?
Well, if we knew what is shoulder to shoulder with what, I mean, the American newspapers up to yesterday saying, has Bush got a plan? What are we actually standing shoulder to shoulder with? I mean, yes, okay, we've got the military in there, but what's going to happen next? What are we actually standing shoulder to shoulder with? I mean, the other thing I'd like to say is, fine, you know, military, we had 30 years of the military in Northern Ireland, but combating terrorism, but you can't just combat it with the military. We have to deal with the ideology. Why do these people hate us so much? Isn't this the thing that we should be asking? I mean, I wanted to talk about the refugees earlier. I mean, I just thought the tactic that we should be going is inundating Afghanistan with aid. The first aid went in today. Agencies said if this is taken by the Taliban, they're not going to send any more, and this is ridiculous. Everybody's hungry over there. We should inundate. The Taliban are going to take the first lot of aid, and there needs to be so much food going in there that there's enough for everybody, and then let's see, you know, the military can distribute it. This is the kind of thing
Jenny Tong, who believes they should be bombed with food, I think was the expression, rather vivid expression you used. Yes?
Well, it was indeed, because at the time I was very fearful that no one seemed to be really realising what a crisis was building there. The aid agencies have been warning for months that there was a crisis in the whole region, not just in Afghanistan. And we needed to do something, not just for the people who are suffering there, but for the political stability of that region. You cannot have a country like Pakistan or Iran, very poor countries in themselves, inundated with refugees that they can't cope with, because their governments may fall as a consequence.
Can we come back to the business of what we've signed up to?
I wanted very much to say something about that.
Martin Bell, what do you think we've signed up to by saying we stand shoulder to shoulder so firmly with President Bush?
We've signed up to a coalition, but to say that theirs is the voice and ours is the echo, I think we'd get it wrong. We cannot have one superpower and a chief lieutenant and everybody else cut out of it. This is a coalition which has got to act together. We, after all, as a society, are quite as much at risk as they are. And I think it's going to be a long, difficult campaign in which we must not compromise the values we are defending. What it is a time for steadiness under fire.
But this coalition, if it's as big as it seems to be and holds, does that make action very difficult? Because the moment you act, you risk the coalition being destroyed. Michael Ancram.
I think the coalition is a layered coalition. There are different levels of the way that coalition is going to work. The question you asked was whether we are going to stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States. And Nicholas Soames is right. If you are an ally, of course you talk to your ally and you discuss things. But in the end, a true ally is somebody who stands by you in the fight. And we've got to make it clear to the Americans, we're not going to be fair weather friends. We're not going to back away halfway through. You know, we were talking earlier, and this is what the fight is about. We're talking about terrorism. Terrorism needs two things in order to flourish. First of all, it needs to show that terrorism works, that it succeeds. And the only way you can show it doesn't is by making sure that those who actually commit acts of terrorism are brought to justice. The second thing it needs is it needs shelters it can disappear into. It needs to be able to disappear back into its communities. This coalition has got to make it clear right across the world that there is no comfort for terrorists anywhere. And if there are states who are giving them support and cover, then it has to be made clear that that type of behaviour internationally is no longer going to be accepted. That's what the coalition must do above all in the long term if we're going to destroy terrorism.
Do you think the coalition can hold together, Terry Waite, in the way that Michael Ancram's describing?
I think it's going to be a difficult job, but it's got to hold together in such a way that it works towards a solution to the root problems. If, for example, where do we stand? You asked where do we stand with America. I don't think we clearly know that yet. If it means backing everything, giving a blank check, I would say certainly not. If it means giving full support to a form of military action that is in fact going to make the problem worse, I would say no. Now, if you want to deal with the problem in the long term, you must address yourself seriously to the root problems, and some of the root problems are, admittedly, the failure of the United States, or the perception, put it this way, the perception of thousands of people that the United States has not been an impartial broker in the Middle East peace process. That is a perception held by many. Now, in some measure, we have got to enter into a much better dialogue, a much more open dialogue with some of those poorer nations and deal with the root problems.
Do you agree with that, Ed Roberts?
No, I don't. I think these countries are always going to hate America. I think that there's nothing America could do to stop being loathed. It's top dog power. Top dog power has always throughout history been hated by other countries. I would give the Americans a bank check because I think that London is probably next on the hit list, and I think that we have to be shoulder to shoulder with them because the threat is
But to go to the other point that Terry Waite made, would you think it a proper response after what happened in New York and Washington to modify American foreign policy?
No.
In the way that because of the actions of the IRA, we in Britain started talking to the IRA?
Yeah, I think that was a disastrous mistake as well, but that's a completely different...
You see, you must differentiate.
Hold on, Terry.
I disagree with Andrew that people in the world are always going to hate United States of America. I think because of the foreign policy and double standards of United States of America, there's anti-American feelings in the third world countries and particularly in Muslim countries. And I give you just one example very briefly. In Pakistan, Pakistani people feel when Russia invaded Afghanistan, Mujahideen fought the war against Afghanistan. There were 4 million refugees in Pakistan, and as soon as the Russian army withdrew from the region, Americans just walked away and let people fight in among themselves.
What are you saying America should do? I mean, if we're talking about stopping terrorism, you're saying America should review its whole foreign policy?
I think if we want to keep this global alliance to form, to fight against terrorism, we should fight against global poverty, and we should fight against global injustices, and Americans should have a neutral policy in this world.
Sir, hold on a second. Do you see a proper response by America being a review of its whole standing in the world and its policies in the Middle East?
Well, I think the important question is
that question, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, yes, I'm trying to answer that because although it makes for a good debate, David,
it's more than that.
To polarise people into saying it must be military or it must be political. I mean, the reality is that it's not about an isolated military action or an isolated country, America. It is about an alliance that's been built up, and it's about a range of action. And that's why I said it is important. I mean, if you look at what's been happening, Jack Straw has been in the Middle East to try and move on the process in exactly the same way that Terry mentioned. And of course, we have to make absolutely plain it is not one religion against another. I'm very happy to do that. You know, I mean, terrorism doesn't just arrive with a Quran in its hand any more than we can say that everything that happened in Northern Ireland is because of the Bible or Christianity. It's absolutely wrong to think that. So we have to build the widest coalition. And of course, the type of military action we take is dependent on the political context, and that will change over time. But one thing is certain, that we will not do it without being prepared ultimately, where it is appropriate, to take military action alongside the other.
But you didn't answer the question about American foreign policy, but which is still hanging. I'll come to you, Michael Ancram.
I think in many ways we're getting away from the whole purpose of what we started here, this war against terrorism. We started talking about a man and an organisation that killed 5,000 or 6,000 people nearly 3 weeks ago. And what we're talking about all of a sudden is generations of change of foreign policy. That is not going to stop this terrorist network next week, next month, next year from attacking us.
What the Americans have talked about a permanent war against terrorism.
How we haven't heard anything. You know, we hear, oh, well, it's going to be financial, it's going to be political, but they're words. Nobody has explained what those words mean and how it's going to stop a man or a woman that is so unafraid of death that they are willing to strap themselves to a bomb and kill us.
Okay. Hold on a second. Michael Ancram briefly, and then I want to move on to another point.
You made a point a little time ago. You said, should the Americans change their foreign policy because of what happened?
Terry Waite suggested they should.
Yes, that's precisely what I was arguing against, because that would be saying to the terrorists, your action has actually won a result. We used to find this in Northern Ireland. The IRA used to say, put a bomb in the City of London and the government will change its policy. It's very, very dangerous to get on that path.
Hang on a second. It was when a bomb went off in the City of London that the British government began serious talks with the IRA.
It was after the ceasefire breakdown. But the whole point about this is what we've got to do is we've got to show that we are fighting terrorism wherever it happens. If we want to show that we understand the problems of other parts of the world, let's pick up the humanitarian point. Let's make sure that we do provide proper aid for people in Afghanistan, who, by the way, are suffering because they've had this Taliban government for the last 5 years. And if we can see that government gone, that's the best thing we could do for the Afghans.
Okay. Nicholas Soames, briefly.
Well, and then I think to give you one specific idea, I hope and believe that the Americans will put their very considerable weight behind the World Trade Organization talks to be held in Doha, to ensure that there is a freer and fairer trading system which will advantage the poorer countries. And Andrew Roberts is completely right. The most powerful, the most successful nation on earth is always going to be loathed, but it can be more perhaps realistic in terms of some of its foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, where it can finally, I believe, take the steps that it needs to take to be more even-handed as between the Arabs and the Israelis.
I want to hold on a second. You can come back to some more points later.
It's quite an important one, I think. It's absolutely right that there needs to be humanitarian aid, a hand of friendship alongside the iron fist. And that is why, I mean, apart from the 32 million that we had already put in, we put in 25 million 3 weeks ago in addition for Afghanistan, and we put another 11 million in.
Hold on a second.
It may not be sufficient, but it is more than anyone else in Europe.
All right.
And hopefully it will be responded to by other Europeans as well.
Thank you. Now I want to turn to this country, and specifically to two more questions that we put, and I want to look at those. In our poll, we asked people whether they thought there was greater hostility towards Muslims in this country now as a result of the action, and 29% said that there was. 62% said they hadn't noticed any difference. We also asked if the situation in Afghanistan and Pakistan deteriorates further over the next few weeks, should Britain accept refugees from Afghanistan? Now, the reply to that was 60% should take more refugees. 60% said no, 28% said yes, we should. And I want to go to both those issues. First of all, on the situation of Muslims in this country, 1.5 million or so Muslims in this country. Do you believe they're under pressure, under attack at the moment, or do you believe that actually in the 2.5 weeks that have passed, that has simmered down if it was there?
Muslims are under pressure and under threat over the last couple of weeks, but I must applaud Prime Minister has taken a very decisive step, telling the people that if they are not the Islamic terrorists or the Muslim terrorists, they are the just terrorists who have no religion. And I think this has helped to allay the fears in the Muslim community, and I think Prime Minister Blair has earned respect and trust of the Muslim community.
Sarah, do you agree with that?
As soon as the aircraft hit, I thought, oh God, please don't let it be Muslims, because I knew what would happen. And the backlash did exist, and there was the hate mail, and there were the attacks, and we know that, as we say, we have an Afghan cab driver who is now quadriplegic, a woman who's beaten about the head because she dressed similarly. So yes, the tensions did rise, but then also letters of support came in, and the messages that said, you know, our fight is the same, it's the fight with ignorance. That we have to dispel. But I think that in many ways we're perceived as almost a fifth column within our society. And we ourselves have to do something to address that, to be shown our roots, our history. I mean, I'm obviously English, but a Muslim. It's not a racial identity, it's a religious belief.
Bob Marshall-Andrews, do you think, taking the second question, that we should open our doors to refugees, which
yes,
people
I do.
seem to be very hostile
Yes, I
towards?
do, and I'm very sorry to see the juxtaposition between those two parts of the poll. The one that says, do you approve of military action if necessary, which a large majority were in favour of, and then are you in favour of taking refugees, with a large majority apparently saying no. I think one has got to accept the fact that if you are going to take action, which is perceived to be in your own interest, it's perceived to be in our interest that those people that agree with it, that you should attack terrorism in this way. You are inevitably, by doing so, going to create refugees. In those circumstances, it seems to me incontrovertible that you must take your share and your full share of the misery that has thereby been created.
But the Prime Minister was saying this morning we had to make sure the asylum process wasn't, to quote him, abused by terrorists. Isn't that the problem for the government, that if you do open the doors, you're going to be open to the accusation that you're letting in people that you shouldn't be letting in at all?
Well, I'm sorry to say that, I mean, nobody believes that the asylum process should be abused by terrorists. I absolutely agree. On the other hand, it would be foolish to suppose that even a tiny, tiny percentage of those who are suffering in Pakistan are terrorists. They are the victims of terrorism in exactly the same way as we are and they were in the United States.
Okay.
And we obviously have a humanitarian duty, and I'm very sorry to see the results of that poll, which I suspect actually would not be replicated in truth in the time to come.
Andrew Roberts, do you agree with that?
No, I don't. I don't think we should be taking Afghan terrorists, Afghan refugees. I really think that the best way to help those people is to allow them to live in Afghanistan. And the way that can be done is by defeating and destroying the Taliban regime, setting up a regime there that has got representative institutions, maybe the King of Afghanistan coming back, who knows, supporting it with military might and ensuring that people can go back to live there.
Where does this regime come from? This is exactly what happened after the Russian war with Afghanistan.
Well, you've got the Northern Alliance there. They
but
seem to be
the
doing
Northern Alliance has got just a bad record of brutality.
I mean, the Taliban regime, before Taliban regime, there was Northern Alliance regime, and you will be surprised to know that Osama bin Laden was brought by Northern Alliance in 1996 in Afghanistan, and it was Northern Alliance who closed all the cinemas in Afghanistan.
You want to see the Taliban
and forced women who are the rival to Taliban, and now we are trying to make the same mistake again, supporting Taliban, and we are replacing one evil with another.
Bianca Jagger, what do you think about the refugee problem and about Britain opening its doors to more refugees?
Well, I think that if we are going to support a military action that will create a humanitarian catastrophe, then we have the obligation to receive the refugees. Yeah. But I would like to say, going back to what you just said, it is important that we understand who financed, who armed Osama bin Laden, and who supported the Taliban, as well as Saddam Hussein, as well as General Noriega, Idi Amin, and many others. When you were talking about foreign policy from the United States, it is important that the United States review the foreign policy that they have, because many of those who have become the enemies, the terrorists, have been those that they have supported with the foreign policy, and the CIA.
What effect is all this going to have on Britain in terms of all kinds of legislation and measures that have been proposed? Identity cards being proposed, proposal by the Home Secretary to outlaw religious language that's inflammatory, speeding up the extradition of people from this country to the United States if they're accused of terrorism. Do you think that we're in for a very difficult period when we'll have to put up with a lot of things that in normal circumstances we wouldn't? Martin Bell?
Yes, I think we are. There's going to be a lot of pressure for the abridgment of the freedoms that we've enjoyed. This, after all, was an act of mass murder that challenges us all. But as I pointed out before, we mustn't compromise the values that we're trying to defend. There may be some tightening up, but we must remain a liberal democracy and behave like that. And we're always going to be open to terrorism and violence. Steadiness under fire is what we need. We're up for a very difficult time ahead, but we do not turn ourselves into a police state on that account or anything like it.
Nicholas Soames?
Well, we are a liberal democracy and we always will be. But the terrorists have raised the bar in such a way now that it behoves us, for the security of our people, to ensure that we have done everything within our power to see that we can make an effort to control it. And I think I'm in favour now of ID cards, and I think a lot of the stuff the Home Secretary has been talking about is absolutely correct. And may I make one other point, David? We have in this country now a large number of people who shouldn't be here, whose presence here is damaging to the interests of the United Kingdom and to the safety and security of its people, and we need to get rid of them, and we need to use the full rigour of the law. And my government, the last Conservative government, had exactly the same trouble as this government has had. But there are a large number of people here who shouldn't be here.
Who are you talking about?
These are people who preach terrorist, who preach sedition, who preach against the interests and the security of our country, and we shouldn't allow it. We should not allow it.
Do you agree with that, Bob Stewart?
I do, actually. I think it's appalling. I don't know how you can deal with it. I think we're going to find measures that we might not even contemplate at the moment, like has happened in Northern Ireland when I was an intelligence officer. We used to target houses and search the whole street. We might even find ourselves having to do that to defend our freedoms. So it's terrorists, and I've been fighting terrorists of one sort or another for most of my army career. Terrorists take total advantage of our society, and they cut through it like a knife through butter. They cock a snoot at us. They don't care about human lives. They don't care about law, and they use that, and then we have to fight them with our hands tied behind our backs.
These measures that are suggested, are they measures that would seriously have an effect, or are they measures that governments feel they have to take because they've got to be seen to do something?
David, they're measures that might just help a little. If everyone in this country has to carry an identity card, and by chance it saves the life of one person, that's worth it.
Jenny Tong, briefly.
Well, I'm very concerned that these issues haven't been discussed in Parliament yet. I mean, since this crisis began, we've had one morning in Parliament, and I am getting very, very uneasy that the whole show is being run by the government, and I've got no criticism at the moment, but we're thinking of all sorts of legislation, and I really do think that the British people's representatives ought to be debating this, and we ought to be doing it every day.
All right, John Reid,
the
Cabinet has only met twice, once for half an hour. Parliament met for half a day and is meeting on Thursday.
Well, I think that's a slight exaggeration. I mean, there have been cabinet
description.
David, no, it is.
Of cabinet meetings.
Just recall Parliament.
Anyway, sorry, you make the point. I mean, the accusation is that the Prime Minister is doing this virtually on his own with the President of the United States, and that MPs are kept out of the loop.
Jenny spent the first half of the programme saying, don't leap into precipitate action. And that's why we're not doing it. And it will be discussed in Parliament. We are looking at a number of things. We will be introducing legislation in 4 to 6 weeks, bringing in proposals which regard to extradition, the abuse of that, regarding the several other aspects of the court system. We have not made any decision on ID cards, and we won't do it just on the back of the attack on New York. We'll see it in the wider aspects of citizenship entitlement. And yes, we are considering the whole question of hate crimes, because it is absolutely essential in the present fiery circumstance we make absolutely plain that no one can go around engendering hate against people in this country who happen to be of the Muslim faith, because I believe that would not only be wrong politically inside this country, it would be deeply morally wrong. So we are doing that, and Parliament will fully debate those issues.
We have 15 seconds, Bob Marshall, if you can restrict yourself to that.
I have to say to John that I don't want to go back to Parliament specifically and only to deal with measures, to pass measures which inflict damage on civil liberties. I want to go back to Parliament in order to debate this conflict. And if we do go back to deal with civil liberties, could I just say, Rob, because I accept what you say.
Speed up if you will, because we have to stop.
I have never known a police officer, excellent though most of them have been, who have not said at one stage in their lives, I am fighting crime with my hand tied behind my back. And they are, and that is part of the price that we pay for the democracy that we live in.
All right, well, we have to stop at this point. Next Sunday on Panorama, the international debate on where the world goes from here, whether an international response to terrorism can succeed, or whether we have to accept that the world is now simply a much more dangerous place than it was. By next week, of course, we may have news of the first military strikes against the terrorists. That's next Sunday. In the meantime, if you want to tell us what you think, visit our website, www.bbc.co.uk/panorama. From all of us here this Sunday evening, good night.
They are innocent people.
When a single event changes history, how does it look through the eyes of a child?
Don't create a war, it will go to mayhem.
On Wednesday, children from around the world share their feelings about the events of the last 3 weeks.
My children at 10 and at 13 are left without a father.
Then on Thursday, we hear the stories of the British who lost their loved ones and those who lived to tell the tale.
So many weren't as lucky as I was.
Terror in America, Wednesday and Thursday night on BBC One.